Summer is almost over, and a lot of us may have collected organic materials such as sand or shells or shark's teeth while out on our vacations. So, why not try to use those on our tumbler? As always, I'll make sure to put everything I used today into the description box below so that way you guys can recreate this item if you would like to, except for the shells and the teeth. I went to the beach and got those myself. But if you're new to my channel, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, and let's wake up, prep these tumblers, and slay all day. Let's do this. As always, we're going to start off with our tumbler. I've already prepped and I primed it this tan color to go with the color sand that I'm using. So, some sand is white, some sand is a dark color, a light color brown. So just go with what you think would match best with your sand. So in my cup here, I have 2 ounces, yes, ounces of epoxy, because we need quite a bit for our sand because we want to create texture with our sand. So we're going to be using quite a bit of this product. I am using store-bought sand. The reason why I'm trying to use a little bit more store-bought items versus, items I could have found naturally is because I want to make sure that you guys could purchase these items if you wanted to. I just wanted to show you how to use them. You can buy sand from the store and recreate it. It's just vase filler, So I'm pretty much dumping that into my epoxy, and I brought the level of my epoxy up to 3. So that's quite a bit of sand, and I'm just going to go a little bit at a time because I don't want to put too much in there. But you definitely want to make sure that there's enough so that way when you lay it down onto your tumbler, it's not all going to sink down, and all that will be left is the thickness of the epoxy. I hope you guys understand what I mean by that. But anyways, you just want to put as much sand as you can in there without getting it too thick, and then we're going to work from there with it. Also, this is extremely messy, so make sure you have a silicone mat to catch all the debris that falls off. I'm just saying it's pretty messy. As you can see here, I didn't put a silicone mat down, and I regret the fact that I did not. So we are pretty much going to work with our epoxy just like how we would a chunky glitter when we put it into our epoxy. So we're going to lay down an area of our sand epoxy here, and we're only going to push it out about 1 inch or 2 off to each side. We don't want to make it too thin. We want to keep that thickness of our sand and our epoxy in one area. So a stripe, and just work with it 1 to 2 inches outwards from it, just smoothing it out really good from top to bottom. And that's all you want to do, because we want that thickness of it, because we're going to come through and we're going to really create some designs in our sand, giving it a lot more texture. To make sure that my bottom is going to stay flat, I'm going to come through and just kind of wipe it off, the majority of it off. I'm keeping it kind of thin on the bottom. We don't need too much down there. And I'm also going to wipe up around the bottom as well, making sure that if any of it kind of clumped up at the bottom, that I'm evening it out. And also around the handle and up around the rim. So again, you just really want to come through and make sure that it's as even as possible, especially around that bottom. And of course, I'm going to come through once I put it onto my turner and hit it up with my torch, popping any little micro bubbles. Now, after I let it sit and rotate for a little bit, I decided I wanted to add a bit more sand to it. I wanted to thicken this up the best that I could. So I'm pretty much going to take that sand and I'm going to shake it down just like we would a fine glitter. So I'm going to shake that on as much as I would like until I feel like it's good. You don't want to layer it on too thick, but I definitely just wanted to stiffen it up just a bit more. So I pretty much just shook that on until I seen it all absorb, and then I stopped, because then I'm going to come through and I'm just going to make sure that it's settling down in there. We're going to make a little bit of a mud pie mess, epoxy mud pie mess with this. But I'm just going to kind of stir up that epoxy and kind of get that texture going for me. But you're going to notice that it's all going to lay back down onto itself, and it's all going to start to even back out again. So don't worry that you're making it too lumpy, because you're not, okay? We want that texture, and if we don't make it textured enough, it'll kind of disappear when we go to apply our layers of epoxy over top. So as you're watching me, I'm trying to keep this centralized, so more in the center, not at the bottom, not too much at the top, because I just want to make sure that it's not going to get too crazy on the very bottom and at the very top. So again, I'm just kind of keeping it centralized in the center, making sure that all my texture stays there. All right, I dibble dabbled, and now I'm going to take that and I'm just going to take my finger and I'm going to push all the way down to the base. I'm going to push really hard and I'm going to create these just long swirl motions throughout the entire base. And what this will essentially do is make those ripples and the sand that we see when we go to the water, or if we go to the lake or the beach. If you look at it and the way the water hits the sand, it creates that kind of shelved look on the sand. And that's exactly what we are creating right here. And as you watched, yes, I was pulling away extra just so that way it wouldn't fall back down onto itself. You see how it looks so much more smoother and shinier? That's because it's still continuing to fall back down onto itself. And to prevent those areas from caving in that we just created, I am going to sprinkle down a bit more sand just to make sure that those highs and lows stay in our epoxy and sand mixture. So I'm just going to shake that down, and not too much. Again, this will just kind of set and keep that in place from here. But that's what we wanted. We want that dramatic high and low look, because after we start applying our coats of epoxy, some of those areas will go away unless you tilt it a certain way. You actually will be able to see those indents still. And then there are going to be some areas, of course, that are a bit textured, and you will be able to feel it with your hands as well. But that's okay, because we're adding shells and teeth to it too anyways. All right, I loaded it up, and as you can see, the sand sunk down into those high areas, which is perfectly fine, because around the thinner areas, it's definitely staying, and that's what we want. So I'm going to go ahead and let that cure, and then we're ready to move on to the next step. So my shells, I've collected this is this summer's haul so far. I collected just normal shells. I have these pretty cool looking shells here in this dish, which I don't know if I'm going to be using these bigger ones. I don't want too much hanging off my tumbler. I do have these big, I don't think I'm going to use those. So I'm going to push those off to the side. That's too big. And of course I have a ton of shark's teeth that we found just the other week actually. For those of you that don't know, we live near Venice Beach, which is the shark tooth capital of the world. So we're very lucky to find all those shark's teeth in pretty much one visit. All right, so now it's nice and textured. Look at that. It looks like sand to me, does it not? You know, I feel like it does. But the first thing I want to do is I want to go ahead and clean up around the rim, of course, and I'm going to come through and just knock down any super pointy areas off of our sand too. So that's perfectly fine. You're not going to hurt nothing. So I'm going to go ahead and clean up that rim. After I scrape that off, I'll come through with some sandpaper and clean that up really good and knock down any points, like I said earlier. And I was going to go clean my debris off, but I used a paper towel and it got snagged all over my sand. So don't do that. Don't use a paper towel to do it. I'm just going to use my brush here and sweep it off. There we go. That works much better. So I'm going to use my epoxy to adhere my shells down. And I decided I wanted sparkly sand, so I'm going to add a little bit of SOC sparkle dust and champagne to mine. It's completely up to you guys. You can keep it completely glitter free, for anybody, but I wanted mine sparkly, so that's what I'm going to do. And this is 30 milliliters of epoxy because I want it a bit thicker because, like I said, I'm going to use this as my adhesive for my shells. I'm going to apply my epoxy just like I normally would. I'm going to apply all 30 mLs to it. Place that right onto my turner. Hit it up really good with my torch. I'm using a fast set epoxy, so I'm going to let this spin and rotate for 20 minutes to make sure that it is nice and sticky for me. because if I went to go apply my shells right now, they would just fall right off because they are pretty heavy. So you want this almost to the point that it's almost cured, so that way you can shove it right down into your epoxy and they stick. Of course, if you're using a regular set epoxy, I would let it sit for almost an hour. Okay, I'm just saying. So that's why I use fast set. So here I'm just kind of planning what I want to use, since this is going to be for me anyways. This is my memento for this summer, okay? So I'm picking out little shells that I think are super cute, and I'm gonna get those stuck down on here. So of course, take your time and pick your stuff out too. I'm also going to keep in mind that I want to add my name to it, or you can add a quote to it, and you want to make sure you leave a space for that. So you could measure ahead of time and do that for yourself, or you could just fly by the seat of your pants like I typically do and just stick everything down and hope that everything will fit when it's time. But so the rest of this is completely abstract. You're just gonna lay it down here and there. I started off trying to make it like groupings, trying to keep it organized, but then it just turned into me placing just a bunch of random ones wherever I wanted, So I had good intentions at first, and then I just kind of went all over the place with it. I'm also trying to keep a gap. I kept about a 1/2 inch gap at the bottom and about a 1/2 inch gap at the top. You don't want it too close to those two particular areas, just for if you want to set it into a cup holder, or if you want to sip from it from out the back end. So, and again, make sure you leave that area blank. Don't put anything there for if somebody does like to sip out of their drinks. Then after I got my shells placed down, I'm going to come through and press down some shark's teeth. You got to have some shark's teeth in there. Now, after I get done adding my teeth and my shells, I'm going to continue to let that sit and cure, and then we're ready to move on to the next step. While that's curing, let's go ahead and get our decal cut out. So this personalization was actually super popular years ago, like when I first started, like 6 years ago. But this was super popular then. I don't know if people still do this now, but you pretty much just want to choose a big blocky letter for the back and then a nice swirly font for the front, and there you go. I really like the way this looks, and of course I'll put the fonts that I use into the description box, but super simple. I know you guys got this. And of course, I'm just going to go with really natural colors. So the big S is just going to be a tan. And then the name Sandy, which is my name, obviously. I'm not just because it's made of sand. Anyways, I made that a beautiful sparkly teal. We're back. It's cured, and as you can see, the shells are still on there. Everything's good to go. I did sand down the area where that I'm going to apply my decal, because it is going to go over a bit of a wavy area, but I just wanted to make sure there wasn't too much roughness happening. Okay, so now the next thing we got to do is layer up our decal. So obviously the main name is just going to go right over top of our initial in the back. Get that placed down right where we want it to on our tumbler, and make sure it is fully burnished down. This is the reason why I wanted to use just regular vinyls for this, because if you use a specialty vinyl like a metallic or holographic, all those little bumps and stuff going on, they'll be able to show through that very well. But with these, you won't even be able to tell once that epoxy goes over top. All right, now to make sure our shells don't look like they're just floating away, and to give them a little bit more structure, we're going to take a little bit more sand right and down into a measuring cup. I am going to use UV resin. If you don't want to use UV resin, or you don't have UV resin, you can simply use your crafter's glue. So like Mod Podge or whatever you have on hand, you can do the same process. Now, a little bit of your adhesive at a time. So if you're using glue or UV resin, a little bit at a time, because we want this to become the texture of peanut butter cookie dough. Okay, that's about the texture we want. Because we want to be able to apply this around our shells and it stay put for us. Because if you add too much, it'll just be too thin and it'll fall right off. Or if you don't add enough, it'll be too thick and we won't even be able to press it around the shell. So you just got to get it to about the right consistency that you're able to work with it. So this is my consistency. It stays on my stick, but if I scrape it off to the side, it pretty much stays upright. So now we're just going to take our stick, and I'm also going to use my finger. So it was like a mix of all kinds of stuff, my finger, the stick, and we're just going to scrape it right next to our shells. But our goal with this is to not fully cover the shell. We just want it to look like it's buried down into the sand and the water just flowing over top. And we just want to reach down and pick these shells right out of the ocean and take it home with us to make this tumbler. You know what I mean? So. So I didn't want it to look overly manufactured. I wanted to try to make it look as natural as possible. So I'm going to take my finger, and that really did the trick with coming through and kind of feathering out the edges of the sand in with the tumbler so it didn't look too manufactured. Now I'm just going to work with one row at a time because, I got to use my UV lamp to cure it, and I don't want to put too much on there and then it'd be all weird on me, and I didn't feel like putting it on my turner. So I'm just going to work with one row at a time, and I did 2 intervals of the 120 seconds. So I just did 2 intervals of that each time I did a row of these shells. But of course, if you're using Mod Podge instead, you just want to set it off to the side and let that dry. You just want to be careful when you're touching everything too. And of course, I was all done, but then as I came back around, I decided to add a little bit more here and there, which is perfectly fine. That's what art is all about. You keep going until you're satisfied with the ending product. So you just want to make sure that you cure that UV resin fully before you move on to the next step. All right, after she is all done, I am just going to take a chip brush, and honestly, not that it really mattered because it's full of sand anyways, but I'm going to take my chip brush and just kind of sweep away any little rough areas that I might have made along the way, and then we're ready to apply another coating of epoxy. So this next part is completely optional. I was really up in the air if I was going to do this because I think it looks great just like this. The epoxy makes it look like water right over top. I was like, you know what, we're gonna go for it. So I have a little bit of my epoxy left over. I added just a little bit of white alcohol ink, or you could add a bit of white acrylic paint or white epoxy dye, whatever you have on hand. Okay, well, that's all. But I'm gonna scrape that stick off because I want it super thin. I'm gonna make sure it's not on either side. I'm just using the edge of my popsicle stick. That's all I'm gonna do, and that's what I'm gonna use to create our kind of beachy water look over top. So this is just going to add a little bit more to it, and you only want to do a little tiny bit. You don't want to get carried away with it by accident. I just wanted it to be an accent, not like full on water look, you know what I mean? But because this look is pretty much, it's supposed to look like it's at the shoreline, I just wanted it to look like that foamy bubbles are collecting around the shells per se, and not too much like in the open sand area. So that's what I was going for here. Then of course, after I get that applied, I'm gonna move my water look around just a little bit. So I'll take my handy dandy hair dryer, and I'm just gonna get that moving around just a little bit, and that's all I wanna do to it. That's it. I'm gonna move it around a bit, and that's it. I'm gonna walk away from it. And of course, to finish it up, I will apply another coat or 2 of epoxy, and then she will be ready to go. Whether you take this design and duplicate it as is, or you take it and let it inspire you to create something that is completely your own, I hope that you guys enjoyed this tutorial today. Again, if you're new to my channel, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, and I will see you guys next time.